In the last step of this project, we showed you how we made the floor pans for my Model A back here. The next step is going to be building the drive shaft and transmission tunnel for the car, which a lot of people can find challenging to make. Now, if we were back in the early days of hot rodding, we might use a wheelbarrow or a 55-gallon drum and just fit it in place. But that's just not going to match the quality of work we've already done on this car. Now, in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a simple but clean transmission tunnel for the car using only a handful of tools. So let's get started. We started by bending up some 1-inch strips to give us 1/2-inch by 1/2-inch flanges and using the shrinker stretcher to form it to match the center opening in the floors. We will use this as our guide throughout the video for making the trans tunnel. To give us room while building the transmission tunnel, I removed the shifter assembly and taped up the hole in the transmission so nothing can get inside. I started by making a wire pattern which is going to serve as a guide for our paper pattern. Here you can see where we've made the first few layers of the wire frame, and the rest of the frame is the same process. Once I got the wire frame built, it was time to transfer it onto paper so that we could then transfer it to sheet metal. I left about 3 inches extra around my cut line so I could have extra material to work with. Once I had the paper template complete, I could then transfer it to the sheet metal. With the template on my sheet metal, I cut it out with the electric shears. After we cut the panel out, we drew on tracking lines that would serve as a guide when we're rolling it in the English wheel. So now that we have it over to the wheel here, you may notice that I have a rubber band on the upper wheel here. What this is for is the rubber band deadens the amount of stretch that the English wheel puts in both directions. So there'll be almost no stretch front to back and only side to side over the wheel, which is what we want. We want this panel to be front and back pretty darn straight, but we want a conical shape out of it. So the way that you do it is you put the wheel so that it's actually fairly loose. So we're going to put it in here, and you're going to put it in diagonal like with our lines. Normally you would run it a panel's front to back straight like that, but we want a conical shape. So we're going to actually turn it like this so that it's running with the lines through the center. As you can see, I have the panel pretty darn loose in here. It's not really stretching any metal. What we're going to be doing is using the English wheel like an anvil. We're going to be forming it over the bottom wheel slowly as we roll it through. So you're not actually doing any real stretch at this point. We're just kind of forming the metal around the bottom wheel. So now that I got this tightened up a little bit, I'm going to roll a few passes and put some pressure down. You can kind of see how I'm doing it. And we'll check back in and just show you what we do next. So let's get rolling here. All right, so we rolled both sides just a couple times through, and man, you can see already we got a nice shape going here. This is already starting to take the form that we want. We just got to tighten it up a little bit. Now, because I only rolled diagonally up to basically my center line, this center area here, especially up in this area, it's pretty flat. So it kind of comes up and then it flattens out because we didn't touch it hardly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the wheel with the rubber band again, just straight up and down, and I'm going to focus in this area here a little bit, just so I can just bring this area up. And I'm going to put a little tension on the wheel so it's doing some stretching. And we're going to stretch up this center just a little bit so it has a nice flow to it. And then we can go back in the wheel, rolling it at the angle like this just to get my ends to pull down more. And we'll check it on our wire form and in the car and see where we're at. And we should be able to get this thing pretty close pretty quickly. So we'll go back to the wheel. All right, so we got the trans tunnel here fit in place. It's still a little large. I've been slowly trimming it down till I get it closer to the size that we want, but I don't want to trim too much at once, and we end up with it being too short. But you can see we got the shape is pretty close to what it needs to be. At this point, I need to start just turning these edges more 90 degrees straight down to meet up. And then I'm gonna have to pull out a little bit over on the sides here to make it match the floor profile. But we're gonna use these flanges we made earlier as our guide. So that should keep us in line so that the panel will flow how it needs to at the bottom. So I'm gonna keep working on this a little bit. Takes a little bit of time to get this fitting quite right, but it's worth the effort. And we'll show you when we're ready to start welding these flanges back together. Once I got the trans tunnel trimmed down correctly, I cleated it and the flanges together into the car. I then used a scribe to mark the trim line on the transmission tunnel so I could butt weld it to the flanges to create one solid piece. I now cut directly on my trim line with the aviation snips to remove the excess material. I'm using our stitch weld magnets to keep the flanges oriented correctly in place. I then added a few tack welds to permanently hold the flange in place. Close up an uneven gap on your weld seam, put your dolly behind the joint, and use your hammer to hammer on dolly fairly hard so that you stretch the metal so that everything comes together. For gaps that span a larger area, you may need to sneak up on the joint by tack welding on either side as you hammer and dolly it to close up the gap. With the seam welded, I can sand any proud welds and hammer and dolly any weld warpage out of the panel. Now that I have my trans tunnel finished, I can start working on the drive shaft tunnel. All right, now that we got the transmission tunnel portion of this project pretty much finished, we're ready to move on to the second half, the drive shaft tunnel. Now I took some measurements just to give us an idea of the length that we need for the tunnel, and a rough cut apart here with the electric shear so it's easier to work in the English wheel. I've also drawn out a line, a strip here in the center that gets wider at the end. That's basically going to be our tracking area where we're going to keep the English wheel inside that line for the most part. So let me take this over to the English wheel and we can show you what we're doing to make this piece formed pretty quickly. All right, now we have our part in the English wheel here, and the key portion of this English wheel process is we have this rubber band on the top here, just like we did with the transmission tunnel. Again, this part here keeps the panel from forming front to back and side to side. It's only going to, for the most part, form it side to side. So I have the rubber band installed. We're going to focus on the center area just to give us that nice rounded shape with a peak in the center. So I'm going to tighten this up to moderate pressure here. We're pretty good already there. And I'll move back here. So this piece here is probably about at the max of what you can do with one person. You'll see as we first start rolling this, I'm going to need to kind of walk with the piece to balance the other side. If you have a helper, that would be great. You just have to work in unison as you roll the piece. Once I get a few passes through this, the panel is going to gain a ton of strength and it's going to support itself and I can just roll it a lot quicker. But for the beginning here, it's going to be a little bit tedious, but we should be able to get through it. All right, so there's one trick you can do here to help kind of speed up the process a little bit and just help the panel curve within reason, is you can basically put some, I would say, body English into it, where you're going to be squeezing on the sides of the panel like this, trying to help it form around that wheel. Now, since this is such a big piece, I can only reach out to about here. So I'll kind of do this half here and then I would spin it around, do the same thing. And that'll help it really form over that bottom wheel a lot quicker. Otherwise, you're going to be here for quite some time going back and forth, just letting the wheel do it naturally. But we could speed it up just a little bit by doing this. All right, we got the piece out of the wheel and I got it all wiped down. Now you can see the shape that we have put into the panel here. And we've established this peak or radius in the center that we're going to work upon further from here. So I've gotten to pretty much the max that we can bend this piece in the English wheel with the lower radius wheels that we offer. You can see I even have a couple little tracking marks that I can sand out or I can hammer and dolly out at a later point, but we're going to keep moving from here. So there's a couple different ways that you can establish or bend this the rest of the way that we need. What we really need is we need these, what I would call wings, so to speak. We need these to be brought down vertical. I'm pretty happy with the area in the center here that's bent. We just got to bring these two ends down. There's a few ways you can do this. You can use a big piece of pipe. You could use an old welding bottle. You can use a friend to help you bend it. Another way you can do it is if you put it on the edge of the table like this with your weight on it, you can kind of bounce on the piece like that, and you'll help slowly kind of bend it over a little at a time. However you do it, doesn't really matter. The end goal is to get these two wings more in a vertical orientation so you can fit it in the car. So let me work this a little bit more and then I'll show you where we're at once we're in the car. All right, now that we got the tunnel rounded out using a little bit of body English, I test fit the piece in here and I'm really liking the shape. Comes around real nice, has a nice peak to it in the center. I think we can work with that. So from here, we just got to do a bunch of trimming. The way I built this floor, I have some crossbars in here, so I have to relief cut for those. But I'm going to slowly trim this piece till it sinks down and it touches our front transmission tunnel so we can get a nice seam there to weld the two of those together. So I'm going to work on that a little bit. We'll weld it all together and we'll show you where we're at in the end here. Using the aviation snips and a pair of pliers, I rough cut the pieces out of the tunnel that sit over the crossbars. I then used the VersaBend brake to put the floor flanges on either side. With my cuts and bends finished, I cleakered the driveshaft tunnel in place, laying the front edge over the transmission tunnel. I then scribed the transmission tunnel where the panel met so I had a tight butt weld seam. I used our electric shears to rough cut the part out and the aviation snips to get a precise cut on my line. Once that was cut, I can go ahead and tack the tunnels in place while they're in the car. This is to ensure that both tunnels stay in correct orientation. Once they were tacked together, I pulled both tunnels out of the car and started welding them together using the TIG 200 again. Now that I had both pieces connected, I could hammer and dolly on the weld seam to reverse any warpage. All right, now that we have the drive shaft and transmission tunnel all welded together and fit back into the car, I'm really happy with how everything turned out. It fits really well and the job looks professional. Now the next step of this project is going to be to move on to the trunk floor. We have to build a raised trunk floor to go over our Z'd rear of the frame. To follow along for all our tech videos and everything that's Eastwood, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching.